Four ranked teams went down and a fifth. The UConn Huskies nearly lost a second straight game at home in a wild day of action on Tuesday.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, joined today by our regular guest and now our host of the Locked On College Basketball Game Night shows on Saturday, Leaf Tulin. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. And remind you all you can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Fantastic stuff there. Leaf, four ranked teams go down to unranked opponents on Tuesday. Dan Hurley made headlines once again for his antics in-game and post-game. A star freshman is done for the year. We got all that plus some previews for today's game, a loaded show after a loaded slate of games on Tuesday. Leaf, let's start. I'm going to rattle off the four ranked teams that went down on Tuesday. We can kind of pick and choose which of those games we want to focus on. Ohio State stuns Purdue, the 11th ranked Boilermakers at home. The Buckeyes win that one 73-70. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, UCLA handles Wisconsin, 18th ranked Badgers. They win that one 85-83. And then we had in the SEC, Missouri just getting into the top 25 at number 22. They lose at Texas. The Longhorns pick that one up 61-53. And in the Big 12, Arizona State winning in Morgantown against the 23rd ranked Mountaineers of West Virginia, 65-57, the final score there. Leaf, which of these games was the most interesting to you? Obviously, the biggest team upset was certainly Purdue, an Ohio State team that hadn't been playing all that great coming into that game. Is there anything in particular you want to start with here?
Yeah, Purdue's the one that stands out the most because that's the team that's the hardest to beat at home.
Yeah.
So if Purdue had lost in Columbus, I don't think I'd really think twice. I'd say, that would be a good win to get, but I wouldn't be shocked. But losing at Purdue, at Mackey, is rare in general. Like there have been years where Purdue does not lose in the regular season. We talked about it on the show on Saturday, and we talked about it, I think, last week as well, about the recipe to winning a league is winning your home games and winning a few that you are the better team against a road team. So you may lose a few of those, but win a few of them. Purdue has mastered that recipe. And yes, they've had Zach Edey, but even years prior, the Carson Edwards Purdue teams, they win at Mackey. They win against the inferior Big Ten competition when they travel. And so to lose a game in which they led by 13 at halftime definitely takes the cake as the shocker and the most important storyline for me of the day. Because Purdue, I don't think they're great, and I've been upfront about that. I don't think they're the best team in the Big Ten, but I did think they were the most likely to run the gambit at home.
Yeah. And it's kind of been a similar story for Purdue in their struggles and even in some of their wins. They have three very good players, and the supporting cast just hasn't really been there. And they can't be as overly reliant on one single player. They were the way they were the last few years with Zach Edey. And that's no disrespect to Trey Kaufman-Rennie. He had 26 in this game. Very good game. Lawyer had 16. Smith had 12. He didn't shoot it all that well, but they were all fine. But the rest of the team combined, just 17 points. And those came from two players. CJ Cox had 9. Jakari Harris had 8. Caleb First, Cameron Heide, Colvin, Burgess, all those guys played. None of them scored. And so you just don't have enough depth. You're so reliant on those two guards and Trey Kaufman-Rennie to lead you. And in this case, the rest of the supporting cast wasn't there. Smith has a bad game. Meanwhile, Ohio State comes into Mackey and shoots 48% from three, knocks down 11 of them. Micah Parrish just goes crazy, 6 of 8 from 3 for him. I mean, that's how you win a tough road game, is you have somebody go nuclear from beyond the arc. This snaps a 7-game winning streak for Purdue, 7-2 in the Big Ten still, 3-game losing streak for the Buckeyes. Just the surprise result of the day for sure. Although we had some decently high expectations for Ohio State, they haven't met those expectations. But to go in, get this nice win here at Mackey is a good result for the Buckeyes. I don't think it's catastrophic for Purdue, but like you said, the recipe for success is not losing those games at home, and this is a bit of a black mark now for Purdue going forward this season. Leaf, want to look at the other Big Ten game here in particular. 85-83, the final score. UCLA doesn't score 85 all that often. Wisconsin, not known for scoring a lot of points. This was a bit of a surprise to see the result this way. Both teams shot over 50% from the field. Wisconsin loses despite shooting 15 of 30 from 3 in this game. They did have 13 turnovers. That was part of it. UCLA only had 7. They got a very effective night from Ade Mara. Not something we've said all that much in the last year and a half, but Mara stepped up when Mick Cronin really needed him to. 22 points off the bench, perfect 7 of 7 from the field. UCLA only shoots 31.5% from 3. It still gets the W here. A much needed win for this Bruins team that's been really struggling, now up to 4-4 in the Big Ten. A little mini 2-game winning streak for them. Beating Wisconsin is a nice win. At home for UCLA, certainly not as impressive if they'd gotten it on the road, but still a team that really needed to win here and got one.
Yeah, both these teams have had up and down seasons where their peaks have looked very good. Wisconsin started the year beating Pittsburgh and a few other teams that were already in the top 25. Then they catapulted themselves within the top 25. They're back into it because they've had a hot streak, and UCLA is the exact same thing. They were up to as high as 12, I want to say, and then just everything went wrong. Mick Cronin goes on those big time press conferences that only Mick Cronin, Dan Hurley, a couple of those very volatile coaches have, and it has lit a spark under his team, but they still aren't playing the basketball I think Mick Cronin would desire. Like, they scored more points. That's why they won today. Mick Cronin's known for defense. So maybe you can say, hey, well, their defense will get better, but I don't know if in the game, as physical as they like to make it, they can score enough. And it took, like you mentioned, great shooting performances. So my stock is relatively cool on the Bruins for the moment. Tough team to play, but that would be how my stock would be in it. And I think Wisconsin, as they often do in Big Ten play, are really figuring out the recipe. I don't know how well that recipe translates into the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying that this is a really true contender, but I do think this team's going to finish in the top 5 of the Big Ten standings, which I don't think you would have predicted based on the turnover of their roster after being a 5 seed last year.
Looking at the other 2 teams here, 2 teams kind of at the bottom part of the top 25, so not stunning. I feel like the SEC is always going to have a team in the last half of the top 25 that's going to lose and fall out. It's just going to be kind of a rotating door of teams in that spot. Mizzou was the team this week. They're at 22nd after a really great couple of weeks. They were 4-1 in the SEC coming into this game. They lose at Texas. The Longhorns pick up a nice 61-53 win. One of the big conversations we've had about Texas throughout the offseason and into this season is the lack of depth on this roster, the lack of bench performance. And here, when they need a win, when they get a nice win over a ranked team, it's because their bench has 15 points. We've talked about this bench scoring 2 points in games before. And without Kendall Weaver, who's arguably their best bench player, they go out, they get 6 points from Julian Kent. They get 4 points from Larry. They get 3 points from Zarek and Yema. They get a pair from Devin Pryor. Needed that bench depth. Arthur Kaluma was the star, 14-12 for him. Texas still only 2-4 in conference play, still struggling a little bit, but pick up a nice win here over a Mizzou team that is looking a lot better than they were last year, certainly when they did not win a game in the SEC under Dennis Gates. But the Tigers come out, shoot just 18% from 3 in this one, end up dropping to 4-2 in conference play.
Yeah, that was a grind game. Like, it was ugly. Every offensive possession was isolation at the end, and it felt like a NBA playoff game at the end when teams are exhausted, not in a good way. Yeah. It was in the sense of the only way to score is try to be better than your man and physically impose your will. And the guy who's best at that for Texas was Trey Johnson throughout the entire season. He was terrible throughout this game. Had a big bucket late that was kind of the final straw to put them up 7 after they were actually trailing from the majority of the second half, took the lead with about 4 minutes to go and stayed with it. Yeah. They needed this win. They were favored and got the win. Kaluma is the big, strong drive. I can score when there's nothing around, but their spacing's very poor. So I'm not overly high on Texas, but I also think, like you mentioned, Missouri and a few other teams are going to be revolving doors at the end of the bottom of the SEC after a good week where they pull an upset win. They're going to move up accordingly and deservingly so. But the SEC's got enough depth that player and that team is going to get bumped right back down. And I think Texas is a tough team to play, not necessarily a team I have that much belief in, but they're tough to play because they have a ton of athletes and are very stout defensively.
Last one here, just quickly. West Virginia goes down at home in Morgantown to Arizona State, 65-57, the final there. West Virginia started the Big 12 play 2-0. They're now just 4-3 in this game. The shooting was a major issue. Javon Small, 0 of 8 from 3. Toby Akani and Sincere Harris combined to go 0 of 6. The team shot 4 of 29. When you shoot that poorly from 3, when you get out-rebounded by 18 like West Virginia did, it's very, very tough to win any games there. Shout out to the Sun Devils. They snap a 4-game losing streak, now 2-5 in the Big 12. And shout out in particular to Jaden Quinton's phenomenal game from the young star. 15 points, 12 boards, 3 blocks, 7 of 11 shooting. A lot of concern for whether Quintons would be able to play with the big boys in the Big 12 as such a young player. He had a phenomenal game here against West Virginia, certainly showcasing why he is a very, very highly regarded prospect. Even though he can't come out of the draft this year, he's going to be in college for one more year. But when you put up these kind of numbers in your first year, yeah, there's a lot of promise about the player he can become.
Yeah, he's a star hiding in plain sight. He's probably a lottery pick this year and certainly will be among those top guys next year and what will be another loaded draft.
Well, folks, Dan Hurley once again making headlines for his in-game and his post-game antics. UConn, meanwhile, narrowly avoided what would have been a second straight home loss against Butler. We're going to talk about that and a few other results from Tuesday coming up in just a second. Right after a word from Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For tonight, we'll get to the previews in the final segment, but LJ Cryer over under 13.5 points against Utah. Kadari Richmond is over under 11.5 points against Xavier. I like the over for both of those. You throw some money down on that, it both hits, you win money. It is that simple. It's fun. It's easy to predict, easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks' Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And while using the app, you can get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Are you ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still joined by Leaf Tulin, still talking about the wild results from Tuesday. We talked about the 4 ranked teams who went down on Tuesday. Now we got some other results around college hoops to talk about, starting with what was nearly a 5th ranked team going down. This one was at home. The UConn Huskies, 19th ranked team, escape against Butler in overtime. 80-78 is the final score. Again, it would have been the second straight home loss for Danny Hurley's team. Solo Ball saved the day, 23 points for him, knocked down 5 threes. Alex Caravan had a nice game. He was 8 of 17, 19.7 boards, 6 assists, and 3 blocks. I think it's fair to say that this team, despite getting the W here, really struggling without Liam McNeeley in the mix. It is clear he was a huge part of this team on both ends, but in particular, the offense has really stagnated without his floor spacing, without his overall offensive abilities. The main storyline in this game, though, and the reason that people are not focusing quite as much on the actual in-game stuff, the lack of McNeeley, the near loss for UConn, was once again Danny Hurley finding a way to make sure that he is the focal point of the post-game conversation. During the game, he was caught on camera screaming at an official. I will not use every word that he said, but he said, "Don't turn your back on me. I'm the best coach in the blank sport." Danny Hurley continues to make headlines by what he says. He was asked about in the post-game press conference. Kind of a bizarre, rambling response to that question from Hurley. Said he thought the camera should be on other coaches more. He's like, other Big East coaches yell a lot. Why don't they show them more? It was odd. It was fine. It was odd. He's a strange guy. I think we can all acknowledge that. You know what? Every sport needs a villain. Dan Hurley is very, very willing to adapt to being the villain role. It's hard to be a villain when your team's not playing very well. Like we said, they did at least get the W here. Butler drops to 1-7 in Big East. This would have been a really ugly loss for UConn. Leif, thoughts here on Hurley, thoughts here on UConn without McNeeley? There's kind of a lot to unpack with this game.
Well, from the game perspective, UConn led throughout and had the game won and then did not. They've been relatively poor in late game situations. Of course, notably in Maui when they lost 3 in a row, 2 of those games were very close. They lost in overtime to Memphis and they lost a close game to Colorado. And you could argue if the possessions went different ways that they could have won 2 of those games and their whole tenor of their season would be different. But the greater story to me is McNeeley was the actual reason for the revitalized offense and just UConn in general. When they beat Gonzaga, when they beat Texas, when they beat Baylor, those wins were because McNeeley emerged as a secondary play creator, someone who could score and create for others, and took pressure off of Karaban, because Karaban is a really, really good player, but he is not a star. And he's treated as if he's this unbelievable player that can carry a team. He's an unbelievable player that fits on any team and is great on any team, and he was a great complementary piece. But the stars last year were Clingan and Newton. And the years before, Adama Sanogo, Andre Jackson. So Liam McNeeley is a different player than Andre Jackson, but he plays a similar role in the sense of he's able to create for others. He can create offense for himself. He's big. He rebounds. He does a lot of things. And they're really losing that versatility. And obviously losing Clingan means that their defense is far from what it was. They were an unbelievable defense, and now they are, I won't even say good. Like, I think they're an average in college basketball, not just average among good teams, but they're an average in college basketball defense. And their offense is excellent still. They run that unique stuff. The concepts are great, but they don't have the personnel that they had in prior years. And it's starting to show they can make up for it with those concepts, with shooting. Like, solo ball's been sensational all year, but they just don't have the horses if he's out. And I think if he's back, UConn's a top 10 team. When he's out, they're about a top 20 team, and they showed their vulnerability.
Yep. Couple results in the SEC I want to talk about here. Tennessee, 6th-ranked Vols, beat Mississippi State, really crushed them in the first half and kind of coasted after that, ultimately get a 12-point, 68-56 victory. It was 34-19 at the end of the first half. Like we said, just a dominant performance from the Vols, particularly in the first half. Chaz Lanier, a player we've talked about quite a bit on the show, especially after Rick Barnes' comments about him being paid to shoot the basketball and how he struggled in the next couple games after that. He was very good in this game, back to looking like the player that we saw from him at times in the non-conference slate. 23 points. He took 12 threes, made 5 of them. He was 3 of 5 on 2-pointers. As a team, Tennessee was 10 of 28 from 3, 12 of 13 from the free throw line. Really nice performance from Team Leaf. I know you're a little down on them. I don't know if this one game changes your mind too much in this particular situation, but for folks who are a little concerned about Tennessee, it is nice to see them bounce back and put together a dominant performance against a team in Mississippi State that had a lot of momentum coming into this game.
Yeah, Tennessee needed it badly after losing at Vanderbilt, and we talked about it in the scheme of Purdue in the Big Ten, is taking care of home court and winning enough of the road games is the recipe. Tennessee is good at that recipe, so they take care of home court and they win against a good team, and that's going to look good on Selection Sunday. It boosts their morale, more importantly, in the short term. And I do think my concerns are going to stay with Tennessee. I don't think they score easily enough. Even in a half where they dominated and they shot well for them, 34 points isn't necessarily riveting. It's good, and it's good enough. But I do think in games where teams have the offensive capacity to score against Tennessee's onto defense, it's hard for Tennessee to score with the other team's offense. And we saw that with Florida. Florida matched their physicality, and I don't expect Tennessee to lose by 30. I'm not saying they're a bad team. I just don't see that number 1 seed level dominance that most people associate with Tennessee as they started undefeated throughout the year. But you know what? If you win those games and you take care of business, I can't critique you too much if you're winning. I don't think I'll believe as a national championship team, but only one team can win that.
I mean, the perfect example is even just this game. I mean, they scored 34 points in each half, and they dominated in the first half, so it looks like a comfortable 12-point win, but they lost the second half like that. I mean, 34 points and a half is not always going to get you a W, and your defense has to be elite. And for Tennessee, it is. But yeah, if teams can match them physically like Florida does, that is a problem. And yeah, I'm with you 100%. It doesn't mean they're a bad team by any stretch. It means they're still a very good team. It just doesn't necessarily mean they're at the level they need to be because the offense isn't quite there. And then you look at it from another perspective, moving on to the next SEC game, Alabama, the offense is very clearly there. The defense is not always there. They give up 87 points to Vanderbilt, but they still coast to a very comfortable win because they scored 103. That's what you need to do. You score 103 points, you're going to win pretty much every single game. The Crimson Tide now 5-1 in the SEC. And I know, Leif, you're a big fan of Diabate. What an incredible game for him against the Commodores. 22 points and 10 rebounds in just 23 minutes off the bench. He was 8 of 9 shooting in this one. Just an elite performance from their backup big in a game where they really needed him to step up. Big Cliff didn't have a great game, and yet Diabate comes in, gets a 20-point double-double in just a short amount of action. Mark Sears had 21, 10 of 13 from the line as well. Aiden Holloway, 8 of 11 from the field, 4 of 6 from 3 for 22 points. Again, Vanderbilt shot 42% from 3, scored 87 points, but the defense just was not good enough to slow down this Bama team, who, again, like we said, now 16-3 on the year, looking like the team to beat, maybe outside of Auburn, at least in the SEC.
I mean, we talked about it on Saturday. I don't think it's crazy to say that they're the best team in the SEC when Janai Broom's out. When Janai Broom's healthy, I think Auburn's the best team. But Alabama's got all the weapons and artillery we talked about at the start of the year as to why they and Kansas deserve to be the top 2 seeds. And it's all true. Diabate is not one of those guys we talked about. We never talked about him as an offensive punch. We never talked about him in general. It was always, their front court has Nelson and Omarui now, and how do you play Stevenson and Philon and all these guys that – because you have 3 guards that are deserving of play, and you have more than 3 bigs that deserve play. How are you going to manage it? Darian Reed's out right now. Well, look at this. Diabate has played 23 minutes in this game. He played 14 minutes against Kentucky, in which he was excellent. 13 minutes against Ole Miss, and he didn't have that big of a performance. Coincidence? I think not that they lost that one. And then you look at his minutes in big games. The games that he's played well in have been the ones that you need to establish the physicality, and they've won those games. So I think Diabate is someone to monitor. I think when he's on the court, Alabama's better because they find someone that exudes grit and does the dirty work, and then it lets some of their more offensively minded scorers do that job, just score. And, you need to have players that do both, and he, I think, balances them as a team. And I'm very high on the Crimson Tide. I don't necessarily want to be, but I can't really help seeing the potential. I think they're a top 3 team in our sport.
2 ACC games to talk about here before we move on and start getting ready for tonight's games. Ryne Smith, what an extraordinary performance he had. You and I almost talked about SMU's game against Miami on Saturday during the game night episode. We didn't get to it, but SMU scored 117 points in that game. It said a little bit more about Miami and their struggles this year. But Louisville comes out, just absolutely smashes the same SMU team. 98-73 was the final. Louisville's up 50-27 at halftime. Ryne Smith, 10 of 17, not from the field, 10 of 17 from 3 in this game, finishes with 30 points. He is one of the best pure shooters in this sport and absolutely knocked it down in this game against, again, this is an SMU team that's 14-5 on the year, 5-3 in the ACC. Nobody thought they were like they weren't getting top 25 votes. They're not in that conversation, but this is not a bad team that Louisville just absolutely smashed in this game. The team collectively 45% from 3 in this game. Terrence Edwards was 1 of 8. Leaf, the rest of the team, 18 of 34. That's 53%. Absolute scorching hot performance. Pat Kelsey looking like, again, the momentum was there for Darian DeVries to potentially be coach of the year from West Virginia. They lose that game to Arizona State. Louisville does this to SMU, and I think the tides have maybe flipped a little bit for Pat Kelsey, at least among new coaches at the Division I level.
I mean, shooters shoot, to acknowledge the first point of Ryne Smith. That's unbelievable. Secondly, I think Louisville is easily the second best team in the ACC right now. And that's the more important discussion of their play has been really, really good. And then the most important part is it's sustainable. I mean, you're not going to get 10 threes, but they found different sources of offense. Some days it's been Javon Hadley, and he had a big game where he won them the game in overtime a while ago. They had a big game from the expected source, and Edwards, like you mentioned, struggled yesterday, and they still dominated a game in which the Vegas odds makers said they were going to lose that game. It was narrow, but if you're able to win that convincingly in a game you're an underdog in, I really do buy your stock. And offensively, they're very good. And Chucky Hepburn's an all-ACC performer, first team pretty easily for me. And he's one of the best hounds on the ball. And that always sets the tone for a defense to be better than maybe the rest of the personnel is, if you can get someone that just pressures the other team's guards. And so I think Louisville's pretty good.
You talked about Louisville being the second best team in the ACC. There's an argument that Wake Forest is third, and I don't think a lot of people would have thought that, but they are now 7-1 in the ACC. They're 15-4 overall. Certainly, it's not North Carolina because they have now lost a couple in a row. They lose to Wake Forest 67-66. North Carolina is incapable of playing anything other than a very, very close game. I think they've played 20 games this year. Gosh, would wager 14 or 15 of them have been within a couple of possessions. It's been just a season that is going to create a lot of heart issues in Chapel Hill for these fans. It's frustrating to watch. Tar Heels now 5-3 in conference play. RJ Davis was solid. Elliot Cadeau was great. 14 points, 13 assists, 5 boards. Team does not have enough outside shooting, 8 of 32. They don't have enough of an interior presence. Wake Forest wins this game while shooting just 2 of 15 from 3 because they were able to get to the free throw line. They were able to get to the rim. Cameron Hildreth had 20 points, 6 boards. He was 10 of 12 from the line. Now Wake Forest 7-1 in conference play. North Carolina season really starting to circle the drain for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels.
Yeah, they're on bubble watch for sure. That win against UCLA may have saved them from what seems like an embarrassing resume, but that win hasn't strengthened. It's actually gotten worse. Luckily, UCLA was able to hold off Wisconsin for UNC. As for Wake, I don't necessarily buy their stock because they struggle to score. Hildreth had a great game, and if someone other than Hunter Salas doesn't score, Wake doesn't score. So I'm not exactly sold on Wake, but you have to acknowledge 7-1, and their defensive numbers are pretty good. Like their team has figured a way to win, and that deserves credit. But Wake doesn't move me the same way. I think Wake's in another tier, a little bit below Louisville, with maybe Clemson, and honestly maybe with Carolina. Carolina's resume looks terrible.
Yeah. Well, we got a trio of SEC games, a trio of Big 12 matchups tonight, including a ranked-on-ranked game in Mississippi. We're going to get to all that to close out the show coming up in just a second. But first, folks, therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, promo code SPACE80. All right, folks, segment 3, closing out the show, getting you ready for tonight's games. Wednesday, the 22nd, we got 3 SEC games to talk about, 3 games in the Big 12, and then 3 other games that we'll mention as well. There's actually a lot of good basketball today, but we got to condense it down to find which matchups we want to discuss. There's one ranked game going on. It is, of course, in the SEC where there are a huge amount of ranked teams. We got A&M, the 13th ranked Aggies, going on the road at Ole Miss, 16th ranked Rebels, Chris Beard's club. It's 9 Eastern time, ESPN2, FanDuel favors Ole Miss by 2.5. I'll give you the other 2 SEC games as well. Florida, the 5th ranked Gators at South Carolina, 7 Eastern time on the SEC network. FanDuel favors Florida by 11.5. And then Georgia at Arkansas, neither team ranked right now. 9 Eastern time, SEC network. FanDuel favors the Hogs by 1.5, despite Leaf, the update we recently got. Boogie Fland, star freshman, best player for Arkansas this year. He is expected to miss the rest of the season. Hurt his hand against Florida a few games ago. Actually played the last 2 games with the hurt hand, but struggled in their last game. Recent update is that he's not going to be able to play. It was a source confirmed to ESPN that they're expecting him to be out for the year. Fland averaging 15 points, just about 6 assists, 3.5 rebounds. Tough blow for an Arkansas team that's already 0-5 in conference play to lose your best player. Really, really tough to see that for John Calipari's club. We'll see if Nelly Davis can step up. We'll see if DJ Wagner can step up in the backcourt for this team. But Leaf, with all 3 of these matchups, anything in particular stand out to you? Do you think Arkansas can get their first W in conference play? What's your read here?
I think Arkansas will be the interesting one to see how they play differently. I think it could simplify roles, like Nelly Davis used to having the ball in his hands. DJ Wagner wants the ball in his hands and is better when he has the ball in his hands than when he doesn't, because he's not a good shooter. So I think there's a world in which Arkansas can still be a solid team, or actually improve and show their talent and make themselves into a solid team without what I would say is their best scorer. Because they have that depth of athletes. They have enough players who can put pressure on the rim. But like I've said a million times, I am not a Calipari believer.
Right.
And in fact, I am a hater. But but that the one that stands out to me is, of course, the ranked matchup, because I think Ole Miss is good. I actually ranked them in our very first poll before the season, and I believed that Chris Beard is one of the better basketball coaches. There's stuff about him that you don't necessarily support, but you have to look at what he's done on a basketball court, and you look at the amalgamation of talent, where he pulled from, and it seemed to make sense. And the one that surprised me has been arguably their best player, in Sean Padula. I didn't see that as a Chris Beard type of guard, and they figured a way to win and score through Sean Padula. So I've given a lot of credit to Chris Beard in terms of the basketball coaching. The one who deserves a ton of it is Buzz Williams, and they have differing styles and how they approach it, but very same intensity and defensive orientation of how they build their teams. So this could be a mud fight. Like, this is going to be an ugly game. But I think the home team is going to pull this out, particularly if Wade Taylor's not back.
Yeah, Texas A&M is such an inconsistent shooting team, and I think that makes them a very hard team to predict, because they can certainly beat just about anybody. They can go win a game on the road when they're shooting well. But yeah, with the Wade Taylor is a significant X factor, obviously, in this game. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him, if he's playing, if he's not, how this team shoots. But yeah, Ole Miss is a tough team to beat at home, and I think they're going to end up getting this one. 3 games in the Big 12. Not the most exciting matchups necessarily in the Big 12, but I'm going to rattle them off here. You got Utah going on the road at Houston, the 7th-ranked Cougars. This game at 6 Eastern time on ESPN+. FanDuel favors Houston by 18.5. Houston loves blowing out teams like this, and we'll see if they're able to pull it off here. Kansas, number 12, at TCU, 7 Eastern time, ESPN2. FanDuel favors the Jayhawks by 5.5. TCU coming off a win against Baylor, but this is a tough to come back and try to win against a very good Kansas team. Speaking of Baylor, they're hosting Kansas State at 9 Eastern time on ESPNU. Always fun to see Jerome Tang playing his old team. FanDuel does favor Baylor in that one, and they favor him big, 12.5. Certainly Kansas State has been struggling, and it's a road game for them, but frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if Kansas State at least covers that spread, if not wins outright, in part because Baylor's been struggling, in part because Jerome Tang seems to occasionally win really big games, and this might be the one that he goes and pulls off. Anything in particular on these Big 12 games you want to talk about, Leif?
Yeah, there's a lot of disappointment in the Big 12. Like, if you talk about any of those teams, I think you'd come up with the word of disappointment for the preference. Like, we put so much stock into, hey, that conference is great before the season. And right now, it's not great. There are some good teams, like Houston and Iowa State are very good. Kansas is still good, and you can make an argument for very good, but Kansas is supposed to be number 1, so they're disappointed.
Right.
Baylor's disappointed because they started top 10, and they aren't even top 25.
Yeah.
Kansas State, I was skeptical of coming into the year, but they could not be worse than where they are right now. So I think that these games are going to be a true litmus test for, do these teams believe they can get better, or has their prophecy been written already? And so I'm honestly most intrigued in terms of just the temperament and effort of these teams for the next couple weeks, because this is when the season's decided. Like Kansas, they're the 12th ranked team in the country. They're going to be all right. But are they going to make their way into being a top 2 seed, which is very possible? They just have to play well, win home games like they always do, and maybe get a win at a Houston or against an Iowa State should they host them in return after being beaten in Hilton. So I think Kansas is the one I'm most eagerly watching, just to see how they handle a road game, because they've not been very good on the road. But the Big 12 in general has been a bit disappointing. Even Houston lost some of their marquee games early in the season.
3 more games to talk about here, Leaf, very quickly. Xavier at St. John's. St. John's ranked 20th right now, Rick Pitino's team. This game is at 7 Eastern time on FS1. FanDuel does favor the Johnnies at home by 7.5. In the Big Ten, Indiana going on the road at Northwestern, also at 7 Eastern time, that game on the Big Ten Network. FanDuel once again favoring the home team here, Northwestern, by 5.5. And then in the Mountain West, down at 9 Eastern time, also on FS1, so this will be after the Xavier St. John's game, will be Nevada at Utah State. FanDuel favoring Utah State by 6.5. So all 3 of the home teams here, St. John's, Northwestern, Utah State, are favored at FanDuel. Leaf, do you think all 3 of the home teams are going to win this games? If not, which road team do you think is going to go out onto the road and get a W here?
I do think all 3 home teams win. The road team I have the most faith in of these teams is probably Xavier, even though they're shorthanded. I just think that they score well enough that they have a chance. I do think the Johnnies win. They're the number 1 team in the Big East right now. That's pretty good. It's good for the sport of basketball, and Pitino's thriving. Utah State's really, really good at home, And I think it's difficult for Nevada to win, but I actually do think Nevada is a pretty solid team. They've won 3 in a row in the Mountain West, which last year had 6 bids. It's not as good as it was last year, but it is a good conference, and it hasn't warranted the attention that 6 bids from a mid-major did last year. But it is a good conference, and that's going to be a good game. So I am eager to watch that one, but I do think that at the spectrum, Utah State's very formidable.
Yeah, it's funny. I think Northwestern's probably the worst home team, but I do think they're going to win. Indiana's just such an inconsistent team. That's been such a storyline for them. Indiana absolutely capable of going and winning this game. Like unquestionably, they can go do it, but they're also capable of losing it too. And I think Northwestern, well coached with Chris Collins, Brooks Bardheiser is tough. Like I think Northwestern wins that one, but that'll be an interesting one to see if Indiana can build some momentum by going out and getting a road W. Leaf, thank you so much for joining us as always here on Wednesdays. Looking forward to a great slate of games tonight. Looking forward to talking about these games later in the week. And then, of course, as we already teased earlier in the show, the game night show continues to roll on Saturday nights. Leaf is live on Locked On College Basketball, recapping all of the night's action. Usually either myself or Isaac joins him. It's a fantastic show. Definitely worth checking out if you're watching basketball on Saturday and you want to hear our thoughts on the show. Check it out. Again, it's on YouTube. It's on whatever podcast platform you're listening to Locked On College Basketball. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for us today here on Locked On College Basketball. We'll be back later in the week, recapping these games, getting you ready for this weekend's slate of action. All that coming up shortly. As always, though, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Thursday, peace out.